Picture this, it's 1637 in Amsterdam. A single tulip bulb and actual flower sells for the price of a luxurious canal house. Merchants, craftsmen, even chimney sweeps are flipping bulbs they've never seen with money they don't have. Then, in February, someone refuses to pay. One small hesitation, and within days, the entire market evaporates. Fortunes disappear like morning fog drifting over the canals. But this isn't really a story about tulips. The real story is about the most powerful corporation in human history quietly building the exact same trap, only on a scale so massive it would reshape global economics. The Dutch East India Company didn't just collapse. It pioneered financial tools we still use today, and then it showed exactly how those tools can implode. The first publicly traded stock, the first modern bubble, the first too big to fail bailout. Everything we've seen in modern financial crises, from the 2008 housing crash to the dot-com bubble to crypto collapses, has traces of this 400-year-old disaster. And the paradox is that the very systems designed to create wealth and spread risk became the same systems that destroyed everything they built. The warnings were there the entire time, hiding in plain sight. This matters because the VOC wasn't just any company. At its height, its value in today's money sits around $7.9 trillion, more than Apple, Microsoft, and Google combined. It employed nearly 1 million people, controlled trade routes across 3 continents, and wielded the kind of power usually reserved for nations. When it failed, it didn't just take down investors. It sparked political upheaval, shifted global power, and changed how the world thinks about corporations, governments, and money. And that's why this story matters to you. Every market bubble since then has followed the same script: runaway optimism, leveraged speculation, and then a collapse nobody wants to admit is coming. Questions we still debate today about corporate governance, transparency, and government bailouts were all shaped by what happened to the VOC, and the world's balance of power shifted because of its fall, paving the way for Britain to rise. By the time we're done, you lines understand the 3 hidden drivers that turned the world's most successful company into a historical cautionary tale. You'll see why brilliant investors miss the warning signs. And, most importantly, you'll spot these patterns in the systems around us right now. The VOC revolutionized finance by issuing permanent share stock that never expired. Before this, trading companies dissolved after each voyage. But VOC shares lived forever, could be traded endlessly, and paid dividends for life. It was revolutionary, and for decades, it worked beautifully. The company monopolized the spice trade, dominated Asia, and delivered average dividends of around 18% a year. People became incredibly wealthy, but early success created a blind spot. The governance structure became rigid. The men who ran the company, the 17 gentlemen, held on to power for generations and resisted change. Why innovate when the old system had worked so well? Except the world changed, competitors evolved. The British East India Company adapted faster, diversified more quickly, and made strategic pivots the VOC refused to consider. While global trade shifted toward coffee, tea, and textiles, the VOC kept funneling resources into outdated spice routes and expensive military campaigns. Their share of Asian trade shrank dramatically, yet they kept paying large dividends because admitting the truth would crash investor confidence. This rigidity set the stage for something far worse. As profits declined, the VOC faced a choice: tell shareholders the truth or borrow heavily to maintain the illusion of prosperity. They chose to borrow, and not just a little. The company pioneered creative accounting long before the term existed. They issued bonds, took government loans, and used bills of exchange that didn't clearly appear on their books. Imagine having 10 credit cards but reporting only one. By 1780, their debt had exploded to levels several times higher than their annual revenue. Shareholders were largely kept in the dark. There were no audits, no regulators, and little transparency. Investors saw steady dividends and assumed business was thriving. It was the 18th century version of Enron or Lehman Brothers, except the charade went on for decades. Internally, VOC officials knew the truth. Letters from the 1770s described the company as a house of cards that might collapse at any time. The strategy became delay the inevitable. And then the external shock arrived. The Fourth Anglo-Dutch War hit in 1780. Britain, now the dominant naval force, attacked VOC ships and colonial holdings. Trade routes were cut off. Revenues collapsed, costs skyrocketed. A company that was already drowning in debt was suddenly thrown into a storm. The war didn't destroy the VOC, it simply exposed that it was already hollow. A healthy company could have survived. The VOC couldn't, because its entire financial structure was an illusion held together by debt and denial. The Dutch government had to step in. Letting the VOC collapse would have caused financial chaos across the country. Its shares and bonds were everywhere held by wealthy families, pension funds, even government accounts. The state slowly nationalized the company, absorbing the losses and taking control. It was the first true too big to fail moment in history. Taxpayers paid for decades of mismanagement. When the VOC was finally dissolved in 1799, it symbolized more than a business failure. It marked the end of Dutch global dominance and the beginning of Britain's rise to power. But the consequences didn't stop there. Its collapse sparked the world's first serious debates about financial regulation. Governments realized how dangerous it was to let massive corporations operate without transparency. The foundations of modern corporate reporting, audits, annual statements, defined liabilities emerged from the chaos left behind. At the same time, the geopolitical map shifted. The VOC had controlled huge territories: Indonesia, Ceylon, parts of India, and trade posts across Asia. When it fell apart, Britain moved in. Dutch decline became British opportunity, and the British Empire's global influence grew partly because of VOC failures. And psychologically, the collapse left scars. Dutch investors who once trusted institutions implicitly began to assume the worst. They demanded more information, avoided risky ventures, and became far more cautious. Economic historians call this a trust recession. We've seen versions of it after 1929, after 2008, and after every major financial crisis since. So what does all of this mean for us? The VOC shows that the same systems that build massive wealth can quietly accumulate massive fragility. Innovation becomes complacency. Debt becomes denial. External shocks become the final domino. This pattern repeats throughout history. And today, we're surrounded by institutions that look unshakable until they aren't. Companies with sky-high valuations but unclear fundamentals. Governments carrying historic levels of debt. Financial products more complex than the people selling them can fully explain. Retirement plans dependent on constant growth. The risks feel familiar because they are. The real lesson is that the VOC collapsed that it took so long for anyone to see what was happening. And we now have systems even bigger, more interconnected, and more fragile. History doesn't repeat itself, but it does rhyme. The VOC created the first modern bubble, the first systemic accounting scandal, and the first massive corporate bailout. We've reenacted each one dozens of times. Maybe these cycles are unavoidable, but maybe we can learn to recognize them earlier and limit the damage. So here's the question: have we actually learned anything? Or are we just building bigger, more complicated versions of the same problems? If this deep dive opened your eyes to the hidden patterns shaping economic history, hit that like button and subscribe. There's so much more to uncover. And now, I want to hear from you. What modern company or institution reminds you most of the VOC? Huge, powerful, seemingly untouchable, but maybe headed toward a fall? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's see if we can spot the warning signs before history rhymes again.